Okay, let's take a look at the nitty-gritty details of programming for the strength and hypertrophy training for arm wrestling. In the previous video we mentioned consistency and progressive overload, and those are pretty much the most important aspects of effective programming, but we can explore how exactly to apply them. Really, the first question you have to ask when designing a period of training is what you actually want to get out of that period of training. Strength and hypertrophy, meaning getting stronger muscles and getting bigger muscles, both exist on a continuum, along with many other qualities that derive from these, and you will get some of each by doing anything on the continuum, but it's a lot more efficient to prioritize and maximize what you want to get at a certain time. There are three main factors that influence whether strength or hypertrophy will be prioritized: diet and recovery, volume, meaning total amount of work done, and intensity, meaning the weight that the volume or parts of the volume is done at. To grow new muscle tissue in an efficient way, the body needs a surplus of energy to support that new energy-consuming mass. This does not need to be that much extra because as a natural athlete, the body can only process so much at any given time. So anywhere from around 250 to 500 calories extra per day should be plenty enough to facilitate that process. But it's important to remember, although it is easy to overdo it if you don't remain moderate, is that as you get bigger, the requirement for calories increases. So if your caloric requirement to not change at all was 2000 calories per day, and then you added 500 calories and grew 5 kilograms of new muscle tissue, the amount of calories to not change at all would increase. So if you ate at always the same amount, at some point you would plateau as the energy supply would run out. But as I said, this is a very slow process, especially for natural athletes, so don't just add 500 calories overnight. Err on the side of caution so you don't just get fat. And as we all know by now, protein is very important, so make sure you have a large amount of it present in your diet. And with arm wrestling not being an endurance sport like marathons or decathlons, the needs for carbohydrates is not that extreme. So if you can favor protein over carbohydrates, it might be more beneficial. And fat, well, fat is good, but if you are eating enough protein, you're probably getting a decent amount of healthier fats in the diet through that. So don't emphasize fat intake, just prioritize protein with carbohydrates thrown in around periods of physical activity. And then sleep. I wouldn't worry too much about trying to maximize or micromanage the exact amount. 8 hours is thrown around, and more recently 6 hours or even 4 hours, and things like micro-sleeping and all sorts of things like that. But if you feel recovered and are making progress, you're probably getting enough sleep. For some people this might be more, for others it might be less. On to the actual programming. Still part of recovery is the frequency of workouts, which really boils down to frequency of a muscle being loaded. If I load the bicep on Monday, on Tuesday the bicep is going to still be in recovery and unable to work again as well. I can work it again, but the tail of recovery grows longer and deeper, so eventually I may hit a point where it cannot recover at all, or the amount of stress I put on it is so chronic or so intense that it cannot even recover to the point at which I started. But if I train the bicep on Monday and then wait until Thursday to train it again, it will be much more recovered and ready to be re-challenged. This time of recovery varies depending on the amount of work done and also the exact muscles and the diet and sleep, etc. But a rough number for muscle recovery is 48 to 72 hours or 2 to 3 days, depending on the stress incurred. So if you train too frequently, you'll dig yourself into a recovery hole that you can barely get out of. If you train too infrequently, the body may cancel out any adaptations you did make from the previous session and you end up treading water. And you have to factor in that time spent actually arm wrestling will also count as training the muscles and connective tissue and central nervous system too, and needs to have time to recover from. Roughly, with an arm wrestling focused workout style, you could have 2 of those in the gym and then 1 or 2 practices spaced between them. But it's important to know how to limit the stress in all of these to let the next session be performed in a way that benefits you more than it hurts you. On to volume, the amount of work you do in a given session. Let's take a look at an example workout structure. This is a fairly general type of program for someone who wants to train a bit of arm wrestling but also wants to do other gym stuff too, rather than specifying absolutely only arm wrestling movements. On day 1 we have some kind of arm pull, which just means some row or pull-up type movement where the arm and back are pulling. which would cover a lot of the strength needed on the table, especially back pressure through the lats and upper back. Then you have wrist curls, which will work the wrist strength and ability to hold position against an opponent, and Levan is a tremendous example of how far this can be taken. I don't think we often see his wrist get bent back, and his wrist curl exercises are very strong. Not a coincidence, I would guess. Arm curl, this could be a bicep focus curl, a brachialis focus curl, brachioradialis focus curl, really just anything that loads the elbow joint through flexion. Depending on what you want to target or focus on, you can change the specific exercise. Wrist pronation, which is going to hit the top roll ability and probably more importantly strengthen the ability to not be top rolled and hold the wrist past neutral to keep a strong hand position, because if the pronation gives out, wrist strength becomes compromised, elbow strength becomes compromised, and the whole thing opens up. And then just a wrist accessory, which could be anything like radial deviation, extension, flexion, ulnar deviation, or whatever else you can think of depending on what you wanted to work on for that period of time. And that itself covers pretty much everything involved directly in arm wrestling, and you can just vary the specific exercises in there to focus on what you want to focus on. But the important part of this workout is the actual volume and intensity, or to put it simply, the amount of work and weight, based on your maximal ability, that you do it with. The relationship between volume and intensity is quite simple. As the intensity or weight increases, the volume must decrease, simply because the work done is harder and you are not able to do as much of it. But the sweet spot for progressive training is somewhere just past the middle, which puts you at more than 50% of your maximal ability, or 50% of 1 rep max, but not all the way to 100%, since at that percentage you can't really do much useful work. But if you back it off 20 or 30%, the amount of work you can do increases, and the weight used is still considerably more than 0%. And if volume is the amount of work done, to do more work you can just reduce the intensity. And volume is largely considered to be a main driver of muscle hypertrophy, meaning if you do more work, you'll grow more muscle than someone who does less. But it's not quite that simple, because if you just drop the intensity, then the work you do is going to be less challenging, and so the stimulus for the muscles to grow is going to diminish, which is where progressive overload enters the picture. So with progressive overload, instead of just repeating the same workout with the same volume and intensity, on the first workout you would do what you could do, and then on the next workout, and potentially onwards to infinity, you will just keep increasing either the volume or intensity to force the body to adapt to more stress. But again, it isn't that simple. You can't just add weight or volume to infinity forever. The body breaks at some point. A beginner or even a more advanced athlete doing something new or who has taken some time off has much more ability to simply increase linearly from one workout to the next, but at some point you have to get more tactical. And this is where a tool called variation becomes very useful. You might have heard about keeping the muscle confused. As mocked as it is at this point, like most things, it still holds some roots in reality. The body is a machine that adores adapting to stimulus so that it does not have to do any more work than it needs to do, which you can see in effect from plateaus in your workouts. Perhaps you do curls correctly, adding weights and volume progressively over time, but then at some point you stop being able to progress because the body has adapted to a point where it is able to handle that stimulus comfortably and restricts further efforts to change. So what can you do? You could attempt to add more weight or volume and hope that the body is forced to adapt to this further stimulus, but the progress with this can be very random, sporadic, non-existent, or even backwards as the body burns out its engine with the excess work. But a much easier and more forward-moving option is simply to replace the stimulus with something slightly different that the body is less comfortable with. So after my simple curls have stopped progressing, I can just switch to a different style of curl, which could be targeting the same muscles in a different way or targeting slightly different muscles. I could replace a straight bar curl with an easy bar curl, a seated curl, a preacher curl, a hammer curl, a dumbbell curl, etc. etc. I am still challenging the elbow's ability to extend, but I'm challenging it in a slightly different way. And so if you wanted to skew the workouts toward hypertrophy more than strength, then the focus would be on volume and volume increases over purely chasing weight increases. Although increasing the weight over time would still help to encourage growth alongside doing more work. And in practice that generally works out to sets of 8 to 12 reps being more focused towards hypertrophy, and sets of 4 to 8 being a mix of strength and hypertrophy, and reps of 1 to 4 being almost purely strength oriented. So in practice, let's take a look at how this template could look for either focus. For the first workout, I can do an easy bar curl for 3 sets of 8 with a weight that I can do fairly comfortably, say 25 kilograms. And then in the next workout, I could do 4 sets of 8 with 25 kilograms again, which adds 8 reps to the total volume, or I could do 3 sets of 10, which adds 6 reps, or I could just do 3 sets of 8 with 27 kilograms, which increases the intensity by 2 kilograms but maintains the volume. Or I can mix and match any of these methods of progression depending on how the workout felt. If it felt really easy, I could add a larger amount of volume and/or intensity, but if it felt difficult, I could add less and only slightly try to creep into progression. And despite how tempting it may be to pile on the volume and intensity from one session to the next, it's worth being a little more restrained so that you have more room to continue the progress for longer before hitting walls. So let's say I have progressed that curl over a few weeks and I'm now at 5 sets of 12 with 32 kilograms. But I can't progress further, despite trying to add tiny amounts here and there. Assuming the diet and recovery and the training frequency are all in good shape, now would be the time to vary the exercise. And let's say in table practice, I feel like my back pressure through the elbow is lacking, so I will switch from the easy bar curl to something that targets that, like a hammer curl, which could be with a tricep bar or dumbbell or belt and weight or belt and cable. It could be all sorts. And especially with arm wrestling, where there's so much range between requirements in an actual match, having a large pool of variations to switch between is a very useful tool to work on the things that you feel need working on. And within this pool, there is really no limit to the exercises, as long as they all challenge the part you want to be challenged. So I could do something like this. Easy bar curl to hammer curl to supinated rope curls on a cable to rising back pressure on Krasimir's pulley, and then return to the easy bar curl with my now hopefully stronger in more ways elbows. It really doesn't matter. The range of specificity really depends on how specific you want to be, but the more specific and individual muscle targeted the movements get, the less variety you are able to recruit, because individual muscles only really work in one way. And this concept of varying the stimulation is one of the core ideas of the conjugated system of training, especially at Westside, and from that where Todd Hutchins got a lot of his strategies. But the rate of change there was typically much faster, switching between exercises every week, which in my opinion does not give the athlete enough time to actually train, learn and progress in the movement. It creates a sort of nebulous phantom of a movement suspended above the whole program, and hopes that whatever you do each week adds into that movement. And if you are seeing progression in a movement, why cut it off short and lose out on getting stronger? I don't think there's any particular perfect way that you can set things up, so any training system is going to require a lot of experimentation and personalization regardless of its basic format. There are a lot more ways training can be broken down and specified per individual, per focus, per anything really. But if you had to choose a single style to train alongside arm wrestling indefinitely, with no real focus on peaking or specific periods of training, this progressive and regularly varied approach would be the one I would suggest. It might look to an outsider watching for a while that you're just switching exercises at random, but if you can make sure the exercises you switch between work the same joints or movements, that's really all you need to worry about. In the next part, I'll go into specific periods of training styles, also known as periodization. For the vast majority of people, especially beginners, periodization is not really essential. But it can allow more focus and gentle manipulation of your training to achieve things that you want in priority to others, and works especially well for people training towards a specific date of competition, so that they can give all of the required qualities time to be worked on thoroughly. But until then, check out the Patreon where I post workouts based on these methodologies we've been talking about. Go and join the Discord server for conversation on all kinds of topics, and until next time, I'll see you later.